Okay, let's talk Toon systems. It's been a long time coming. Redshift finally has an answer to non-photorealistic rendering, Toon shading rendering. It's pretty impressive. It's fast, it's pretty fully featured, and it's fairly easy to get some really interesting looks. I'm gonna break down how I was able to get this watercolor sketchy look using Greyscalegorilla Plus materials and the new Redshift Toon system. Let's jump in.
Okay, so here we are in Cinema 4D. We've got our robot here. Full disclosure, I'm going to be using quite a bit of Greyscalegorilla stuff, so if you're not a member, what are you doing? Go get a membership, get access to all this amazing stuff that's going to be part of this video. If not, hey, I understand, you might be able to follow along with whatever assets you're going to use, but we're going to be using a lot of Greyscalegorilla stuff. So obviously, we have Redshift as our renderer. And I went ahead and turned off global illumination because we're not going to need it for this. I also went ahead and did a couple other little things that's worth noting. I actually brought my samples down to my bucket quality down to low just to speed this whole thing up. Turned off hardware ray tracing, which is going to speed things up initially too. There's no GI. I limited my combined depths. I limited my reflections. I'm not using that. I limited a few other things here just to make it go a little bit faster. And the other thing that I did, if I jump into advanced and go under sampling, I am using a triangle filter, but again, you don't have to touch this. I just wanted it to look extra sharp. So I'm using a triangle filter with a filter size of 2.5, but you could obviously just leave this as default if you wanted to. It's up to you. All right, so the other kind of housekeeping thing that's worth noting is the use of some of these post effects here. So if I twirl over my little gear here in the IPR, I'm going to go over down to color control, and I'm going to enable this little S-curve that I've built here. Now the S-curve is also lifting the blacks a little bit, so we're not getting anything that's like truly black. And then it's a pretty aggressive curve, kind of towing off, the shoulders kind of going off into the highlights here, which again, you don't have to do. It's just something that I did in the scene that made it look a little cooler. All right, so let's collapse that down. What else is worth noting here? Oh, let's set up our background. So the way I'm going to do that is grab my camera, and I'm going to use the background tab right here, which is relatively new. And we're going to change this to override. And you can see it's already got my image loaded in, which is just coming off of one of the Greyscalegorilla craft papers, which is the Natural Latka Paper 02. And I'm not going to show you how to pull that in. It's pretty easy. You can just figure out where that file is and then just dump it in here. And it gives us this nice paper background that we need to get our illustrative look going. And I think I dropped the saturation way down to -85%. Again, you could throw any texture back here that you want. I just am using a paper to make it kind of sell that illusion that this was actually painted and drawn on actual paper. All right, so next up, let's start building the material. Okay, so the first thing we're going to tackle is going to be the contour lines, the lines that kind of make the whole thing look like it's drawn, right? So let's jump over to our little material area here, grab materials. We're going to go down to Redshift and grab a new Toon material. And we're going to dump this right on top of our robot mech. And immediately we're given all these amazing Toon lines. So for us to visualize this properly and really understand what it's doing, we need to change the tone map. So you can see I'm not going to get into the complete tour of this material, but it works off of tone mapping, contours, and reflection tone mapping. We're not going to be doing anything with reflections, so I'm just going to go ahead and unplug that and delete it. We're not doing any sort of Toon reflections on this guy, but we are going to be doing a lot with the contour and a lot with the tone mapping. So let's go ahead for the sake of this and just disconnect our tone mapper. Actually, we're going to reconnect that because that's not what I want to do. We're just going to limit this. So if we jump into the base tone map, you can see we've got this like steppy gradient that we can use to basically, show off what's shaded and what's lit. But we can limit this down just by basically deleting all these knots, and you can see we're really limiting. Now we've got like two tones right now. We've got light and we've got dark, and if we make this dark kind of go all the way down here, it'll make our robot look more in light, which is already looking kind of cool. But for right now, just to visualize this, we're going to go ahead and just get rid of that. We'll add that back in later, but right now we just want to see what our lines are doing and how to get the cool looking illustrative rough kind of grungy lines. So that's all going to happen in the contour node. So let's just zoom in here to our contour node, grab the contour. You can see we have internal and external. And if I turn off the internal, you can see we're just kind of left with this external. So you're going to be able to control both the internal and the external separately, which is great. You've got control over the thickness, the modifier, the opacity. You can really get creative with this, which is why I really enjoy it. So let's go ahead and right off the bat, let's just bring our thickness down to maybe like 5, just so we can see a little bit more of the detail that's going on in this model. And that's looking pretty good, but right off the bat, I'm going to turn off the internal just so we can focus a little bit more on these external silhouette type of lines. So if we bring that thickness back up to like 10, all right, here we go. Now we're getting somewhere. We have something to start with. So the way that you're going to do this is you have to kind of imagine that you're going to be driving parameters with other parameters. You're going to be driving things with noise, right? So let's just go ahead and bring in a max on noise. I'm just hitting C here. Let's type in noise. We'll grab a max on noise and grab it. And we're going to call it, we're going to use the Luca, which is just one of my favorites. Let's solo it so we can kind of see what we're dealing with. And I'm not sure if it's going to come through, but it's very, very fine right now. So under input, let's go ahead and change the scale of this to maybe like, I don't know, 100. That's going to be too much. Let's try 50, somewhere in there, maybe even less than that, maybe 30. And let's clamp it a little bit. We're going to go into the output and we're going to clamp it a little bit. We're just going to clamp the low and clamp the high, just to get a little bit more contrast in here. So this noise is what's going to be used to drive the width of this contour line to make it look hand-drawn. So now that we've got the noise built, we need to control the amount. So let's put this into a range. We're going to do a color change range, or actually we're going to do a float change range. So let's go range and type in change range. Perfect. All right, well, they're going to drive that color is going to drive the input of our range. And now we kind of are going to be able to sort of like see what we have here. So we're going to take this entire range and we're going to drive this into our contour internal, actually external, I believe is what we left on. Yep, external. And we're going to put this into our external thickness modifier. And let's go ahead and unsolo this so we can see what it looks like. And already right off the bat, we have something that looks relatively illustrative. And if we just bring our contour up a little bit more, maybe to like 15, our base kind of thickness for this contour, we can now kind of see what we're dealing with here. And it might be a little bit too fine. So let's just grab our noise again and let's bring that overall scale down to maybe like 15. Actually, that's going to make it worse. We need to go the other way. We need to go to 60 to make it bigger. Okay, this is looking better. All right, so now we've got some areas that are thin, some areas that are thick, and it kind of looks sketchy. It kind of looks like a sketch, which is exactly what we want in the situation. The other thing that we could do too is we could drive that width with a fall off, like a Fresnel, for instance. So if we wanted to grab a Fresnel, and the Fresnel is just going to be like a facing ratio type of shader. So if we just like look at this, you know, as it is, you can see we've got like, it's white on the angle of incidence and it's pretty dark on the facing angle. And you can kind of control this a couple different ways. You could either use the index of refraction and sort of play around with these numbers to get, you know, what you need. I'm going to kind of do it that way just because it's going to be a little bit easier to kind of see in this demo. Let's make it like a little bit, yeah, somewhere in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this as a value to drive the width of that line too, just so you can see what that's going to look like. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to dump this into, we'll just use the same change range because we haven't really played with that. We haven't adjusted this one yet at all. So we're kind of in a good place to see what that looks like. So let's unsolo this. So you can see now on the angles facing away from the camera, we've got pretty big, you know, lines. And then the ones that are sort of like coming towards camera are going to be a lot thinner and almost too thin because it's actually going to 0 right now. So if we want to just not get rid of any lines, we can use our change range and maybe bring this up to like 0.2. So that's going to bring some of those lines that were completely gone before back into where we want it. So this is kind of a good technique if you're trying to do like a marker look where somebody's adding thicker lines to the you know, to angles that are facing away from camera and thinner lines that are coming towards us. In the future, I would like to see a light shadow material, a light shadow node that will allow us to control the thickness of the line based on the angle of light, but we can't do that right now. I mean, I could technically, but it would be a lot of crazy nodes that we're not going to get into today. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. I think I want to actually use this, but we're gonna manipulate this a little bit with our noise. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm just going to multiply our noise on top of this Fresnel. So we can do that a couple different ways. The simplest way is just to grab a multiply node, MUL, and we're just going to drop this into input 1, and then we're going to put our noise into input 2, and then we'll put that whole thing into our change range. And now we're getting a little bit of that illustrative look, but it's being mixed on top of our Fresnel fall off. So let's bring our contour, our main thickness up to maybe like 18, so we can kind of see that a little bit better. And this might be a little bit too heavy. It might be a little too much on the Fresnel. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit easier to control. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to grab a layer, color layer, and this way I'm going to be able to sort of mix this in a little bit better. First thing I'm going to try, I have not tried this before, so if this doesn't work, it's completely on me. I'm going to use the Maxon noise as our base, and we're going to bring our Fresnel into color 1 on layer 1, and we're going to set this to overlay. And we're just going to see if this works. And if this works, then great. If it doesn't, then I'm an idiot. But it worked, and that's kind of what I was going for here. So what's nice about this method is now that we have this in here, we can kind of control the Fresnel contribution and bring that down to 0. So we have absolutely no kind of like thickness based on the angle of incidence, but then we can bring that all the way up, and now we do. So maybe I want to bring this to like 0.7, somewhere in there, and I'm going to bring my contour line down a little bit because it's a little too thick. All right, this is looking pretty good. We might want to make it a little bit more ratty, in which case I might just bring this down a little bit even more just to see, and bring that thickness right about in there. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so now we have kind of this illustrative line that's kind of messy and gets thinner on the angle or on the facing ratio and a little thicker away from camera, which is kind of what I'm liking. And we could actually now turn on our internal as well to get even more lines into this. But honestly, like, we might be able to just get away with the external lines. There's quite a bit of detail just in that alone. But let's go ahead and turn this on anyway. And we're just going to use the exact same change range into that internal thickness modifier. So let's go ahead and drag that in. We're going to go internal thickness modifier. Cool. And let's go ahead and make sure that we are making this a little bit thicker. You probably don't want to go quite as thick as the other one. And then I also want to play with my angle threshold. So if I do a really low angle threshold, it means that it's going to try to draw a Toon line on something. Basically, it's going to try to, like, it's like a threshold. Like if it falls within, I don't know the math exactly, the angle, maybe it's 1 degree. I don't know what the conversion is. If you know in the comments, let me know. But essentially, the larger this is, the less likely it is to draw a Toon line because it doesn't see that as an actual edge or an actual, Toon line worthy edge. Okay, I'm just getting all out of control here. Okay, so let's bring this down, and I'm just doing this to taste. I'm not really, there's no real rhyme or reason to my adjustment of that, but that's feeling pretty good. I might want to make the entire external a little bit thicker, maybe like 14, just to kind of like, oops, I did not mean to type that. Let's go 14. 14, what's wrong with my keyboard? There we go. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so now we've got this like illustrative look, and it's looking good. Trying to think of what else I might do here. I might adjust the size of this noise a little bit more and make it a little bit smaller. So maybe like 40. Let's try 30. Again, I'm just soloing that noise. And let's just jump back out. I feel like maybe that might be a little too far. Let's bring some of that Fresnel back into it. And let's bring this whole thickness up a little bit, maybe to like 16. There we go. I was just trying to get a little bit more grit into it and make it look a little bit more messy. And obviously we can kind of take it even further. We could like make this line maybe not so thin and kind of thicken it up to make it look more like a marker. But I'm just, again, adjusting to taste. There's really nothing scientific about this. It's just creative. And that's really what this is all about. Like whenever I'm doing Toon stuff, I'm literally just playing around, trying to break it, trying to make it do something that looks interesting, that looks illustrative. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You just got to play around with it. Okay, so the basis of my Toon line is looking pretty good. I'm kind of digging it. I've got signal driving the rotation of this mech, so if I like go back to the first frame here, we can just kind of see what it's looking like. And you can see how fast it is. It's really pretty incredible. Okay, we've got a line that I think is pretty good. It might be a little bit busy. So I'm going to do one last adjustment, which is I'm just going to adjust this angle threshold again, just to try to like kill some of those internal lines. I don't want to have that much detail in there because that's going to muddy up the watercolor look. Okay. That looks pretty good. Okay, so I think we've got our Toon line the way I want it. So next up, we're going to dive into the watercolor texture, and then we're going to add some halftone to make it really, really sing. Okay, so I cleaned up the nodes a little bit to make it a little bit easier to see. So let's start adding our watercolor texture to this. So to visualize this a little bit easier, I am going to unplug the contour just so that we're looking at like only the shading of this robot. So the first thing I'm going to do is jump into my Greyscalegorilla Plus library, and we're going to twirl down to the Watercolor Redshift materials. They're tactile materials. These are all scanned, so they're really, really pretty, really, really awesome. I painted them myself, so I'm a little bit biased. Okay, so I'm going to use the Watercolor Aqua Small Splotchy Wash, and we're just going to drag that into our material lister. And we're going to open that up, and we're going to steal the base color from this. That's all we need. I'm just going to Control-C, copy that, go into our Toon material, and paste it in. Now, if we just drop this directly into our Toon material color, you're going to notice that the whole thing gets wonky because our robot doesn't have good UVs, and it's defaulting, I think, to you know, like a spherical UV space or something. I don't know. These are not UV'd at all, but that's not a big deal because what we actually want to do is project this through the camera. We want this to be completely flat, projected through the camera, and yes, it's going to swim, and that's kind of the point because we want it to kind of feel like it's been drawn on there in the same sort of like space as our background here. So I'm going to grab the material tag, and we're going to come over to projection, and we're going to say camera, and we're going to choose the camera that we're looking through right now. Boom, there we go. We do need to change the film aspect from standard 4:3 to 1:1. And once we've got that, now you can kind of see our splotchy watercolor, right? Okay, so if we plug our contours back in on top of this, you'll kind of start to see this come to life a little bit. All right, so now we have just a very sort of generic looking splotchy robot, which is kind of, you know, cool. I'm digging it. But maybe we want to adjust some things. Maybe we want to slightly adjust maybe the hue based on the objects that we have, our robot pieces, right? So there's this really cool node. I'm not going to get too deep into this one because I could do a whole video on this. The jitter node. So the jitter node is basically a way to randomize values, randomize color, float, integer, all kinds of stuff. And in this case, we're going to use it to basically randomize the color of our watercolor. So if we drag our base color of our watercolor texture into the jitter, and we're going to pipe this into the color of the color jitter. And if we just go ahead and solo this, you can see right here, if I jump into the controls of this guy, we can change a lot of different stuff, the hue, saturation, and value. So I do want to change maybe the hue a little bit, and maybe we want to shift off maybe like 10 degrees of the hue. And let's change the seed so we can kind of see what it's doing here. Maybe we want to go even further. So let's try 45. So let's go 45 on the hue, and we're getting just slightly different values, and maybe I don't want to adjust the saturation so much. There we go. And the value, I'm just going to say 0, 0. We don't want to adjust the value at all. Cool. All right. And maybe we want to go even further. Maybe go 90 degrees on that to make it even crazier. That's probably too much, actually. Let's relax a little bit. That's a little bit too heavy. So let's do 20, somewhere in there, just to vary it up a little bit. And maybe we will do a little bit of variation on the value and just kind of bring this in a little bit just to create a little bit of more visual interest to this. Okay, so that's feeling pretty good. Let's change the seed one more time, see if we can get something kind of interesting there. Okay, cool. All right, so let's pipe this into our color of our Toon, and let's just go ahead and unsolo so we can kind of see what this looks like. And I'm just doing this to create a little bit more visual interest. So it's just a way for me to like layer up some of these different looks. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna do is maybe tweak the hue of our base color. I'm gonna do that before it goes into the jitter, because I don't feel like adjusting the hue offset sort of like, you know, at the same interval or same rate, because it'll be a little hard to control that way. So I'm going to grab a color correction node, and drop that right in here. Put that right on that guy and there. And now I'm just going to hue shift this just ever so slightly. Maybe I'll go kind of aggressive into these like pinks that I kind of like. And that looks pretty cool. All right. It's already looking really good, but we can take it a step further. Let's go ahead and grab our jitter again, and I am going to bring the potential of those dark areas to get even darker, maybe not that quite dark, and change our seed till I see something that I like. That feels pretty good. Okay. All right, so we've got kind of the base color of our pink splotchy watercolor robot, and now I want to start to add some of that tone mapping. Some of the shading that's going to go into making this robot look like it's lit, because right now it's very flat. There's really no light or shadow happening on it at all. And I want to show you a couple different ways that we can do that. So let's do that next. Okay, I made some room for myself so that we can start to play around with some of the shading now on our bot. So we're going to grab a halftone. I think they call it tone map pattern. So the tone map pattern is really cool. You can just pipe this directly into the tone map of your Toon material, and you can see it already gives us like this halftone kind of comic strip vibe. We're going to do some things to mess this up so it doesn't look so perfect. So the first thing I'm going to do is rotate it 45 degrees to make it look a little bit more like a, you know, like a true sort of comic strip halftone pattern. And then we're going to adjust the scale, but we're going to do that with a noise so that we have a little bit more control over, you know, making it not so perfect. The color, I am going to make it not quite black. I'm going to make it like a 50% gray or somewhere in there, just so that it's not so contrasty. All right, so let's grab another noise. Grab a max on noise, and we're going to use, again, we're going to use the Luca, which I love, and we'll go ahead and isolate that so we can see what that looks like. And we'll use a scale of like, let's use a scale of like 30. And we're going to clamp this similarly to our other noise, but maybe not so heavy. And I might want to make this one a little bit bigger, somewhere like in there. All right, so again, we're going to use another change range to be able to control the output of this noise. All right, that looks good. So we're going to use this change range to drive the size of our little halftone pattern. So the way that we're going to do that is push this directly into the scale of our tone map pattern. And let's unsolo that so we can see what that looks like. And immediately it's kind of broken because we're using a lot of, we're using a pretty big range here. It's like 0 to 1. So we make this 1 and 1, we'll be able to kind of see where our scale is. So maybe we want to bring this down to maybe 0.8, I'm thinking might be the right size. And let's bring our new range min and max both down to 0.8, because this is about the size that I want it. So we're just going to now make this one a little bit bigger to mess it up. So you can see it just kind of added just a little bit of that imperfection to it, which I like. And it might be that it's a bit heavy still in terms of like the color. So maybe I'll just bring this up a little bit to make it not so dark. All right, that feels pretty good. So the next thing I want to do is maybe add a different style and maybe change it up a little bit. So let's grab a color layer. And this is going to allow us to sort of layer some of these looks together. We'll put that into the base. And we'll push this right into our tone map. And now I'm just going to split this off into a new tone map pattern. And again, I'm just holding down control and dragging. And we're going to use the sine waves. The sine waves are kind of interesting. In fact, let's just push this directly into our material here. We set it to 45 as well. And this time, though, I'm going to put some colors in here just to make it a little bit more interesting. And I'm just picking some colors arbitrarily a little bit just to kind of like see what this does. And maybe we want to adjust the scale. We're going to actually use that change range to drive the scale of this one too. So we'll do that. and now we're getting some interesting looks there. Now let's blend the sine wave look into our original, and we'll put that into our color layer, color 1, and let's change our blend mode to lighten, and let's unsolo that so we can see what that looks like, or push this into our material rather. And you can kind of see it's like breaking it up a little bit more, kind of creating a little bit more schmutz on there. But maybe we want to try just a different transfer mode or blend mode. Maybe we want to try like a darken. That's going to be too much. Maybe we do add. That's interesting, but not what we want. I'm going to go back to the lighten and then just sort of adjust it down. And again, you're only kind of seeing it in certain areas, and it's just kind of like breaking up that halftone a little bit more to make it look even more kind of messed up. So the last thing I did when I was messing around with this was I changed the opacity of the bot. Now this has a pretty big effect on it just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So if I jump down into the Toon material settings and I go to opacity, I'm just going to knock the opacity down on our model a little bit, like maybe like in this range. And all this is doing is allowing you to get that like look through the model. And this is really kind of what sells a lot of that like really detailed painterly vibe, is like I'm literally just like looking through it, and there's like lots of detail in this geometry, so it kind of helps us out. And again, like, you know, this is all adjust to taste. You know, there's no right or wrong answers here. It's just like whatever you think is looking good. I am going to adjust my hue shift and like bring it into, ooh, I like that. I'm going to maybe now I'm going to bring my level scale up to like maybe 1.2 and maybe a little bit higher and maybe a little bit more saturation. Too much, 1.1 ought to do it. And I'm liking how these reds are coming in, and maybe I might hue shift it a little bit more to get more of those yellows and oranges in there. Yeah, I'm vibing this. This is looking pretty good. Okay, so I feel like it's looking pretty good. And obviously you could use the jitter to kind of like take it even further. If we wanted to have some of the objects be like extremely dark versus light, you could do that with a jitter and then just like hit random seed until you find an area that you think looks good. Like that's not bad, but it's probably a bit too dark if I'm being honest. And maybe we want to brighten up parts of it instead. And again, I'm just hitting random seed until I see something that I like. And maybe we want to take this a little further. Yeah, I'm vibing this. So again, that sine wave isn't like doing a ton for us, but it is breaking up the halftone a little bit and making it look a little bit more interesting, which is really what I'm after. So right off the bat, we're looking pretty good. I would say that we're close to being done. And if you wanted to end it right here, that's totally fine. But this next part here is really interesting and kind of, you know, helps sell the look. And it's a bit advanced and not crazy advanced. I have faith in you. You can figure it out. You'll be all right. But we're going to walk through it. And that's going to be to create kind of this wash that you see in my original render. All right, so let's do that next. And then I think we're almost done. All right, so here is the fun part, right? So one of the things I wanted to do when I made this was try to find a way to make it look like the watercolor is sort of washed in areas that are sort of beyond the boundary edge of our model here, to kind of make it look like it's been painted, right? It's this watercolor, it's kind of messy, might, you know, bleed out in areas. So I had this idea of essentially creating a little like dummy version of our robot. And this is kind of hilarious looking. It sort of looks like a Michelin Man or something, but all I did for that was take our original piece of geoth, drop it into a volume builder and then into a volume mesher, and then I'm just displacing it, right? Just to create a generic sort of silhouette of our robot. And then I just drag it behind the original robot so that it sits behind it and not in front of it, not through it, although that might look kind of interesting if it did. In fact, we can try that in a minute. But from there, I've got a pretty simple material. I'm using another, this time I'm not even using a Toon material. I'm just using a standard material. And I'm taking that same watercolor material, pushing it through a color correct, and then into both the base color and the emission color. And that's so that I can adjust sort of the intensity of the look. But the most important part is going to be this Fresnel, which is basically taking the edges of our bulbous like dude here and making the edges fall off to be transparent so that the only part that is actually somewhat opaque are the angles facing the camera. So this kind of gives us that gradient vibe that kind of washes into the paper, which is exactly what you see here. And we can kind of make this a little bit easier to see if I were to take this white color, which isn't quite white, and we make it pretty opaque. And now you can see it a little bit more, and you can obviously, you know, tweak this around if you want to. And in fact, for this purpose, I will sort of like make this look a little bit more heavy-handed. But I wouldn't go this far with it. In fact, like this probably kind of breaks. You can see some weird edges here, so you kind of have to be careful. In fact, if I had to go back and do this again, I would probably make this a much smoother piece of geometry, because any of these overlapping edges are going to kind of give you weird artifacts that you can see like right in here. But for this demo, it's totally fine. In fact, let's go ahead and bring that back to where it was. There we go. And you can get kind of creative with it. You can take this particular model and you can like move it maybe into like actually have it sort of penetrate our robot, which kind of gives this interesting effect. You can see on the back of the head where it's like penetrating. It's giving us a slightly different look because it's kind of occluding some of the shading that's happening on our robot. So if we bring this even further forward, you can see it really starts to affect it in interesting and weird ways. There's a bit too harsh of a line here. It kind of looks weird, but it is an interesting look, and it may be something that you're after. I don't know. Who am I to judge? You know, like you're out there doing your own thing. I'm not going to tell you what's right and what's not right. You know, it's like, it's art. Okay, so that's pretty much how I did that watercolor wash. And then I just made sure that I put the same signal tag to do the rotation on that guy as I did the other model as well. And by the way, Greyscalegorilla Plus, you get all these wonderful assets, the paper that I use in the background, the watercolors, all kinds of watercolors, and also you get our plugins, which make looping and doing things like these spins a lot easier, a lot faster. Not that that's like super hard, but it is a nice tool. Okay, so I think we're there, guys. I think we did it. I think I gave you a pretty good rundown of the scene. And, you know, what's great about this entire setup is that it's so responsive. Like, I'm just like going through the timeline here and we can find like a cool part. It just looks good. It's just like, I don't know, it's fast. I mean, there's some of that artifacting that I was talking about before. I would probably make this geometry a lot smoother if I was going to try to get this look to look right. And again, if we wanted to try a different watercolor wash, we can just jump into the Plus library. And maybe we want to try a different watercolor. Maybe we want to try something that is a bit more subtle and has some like, you know, kind of weird little patterns. We can grab that one, drag it in here, steal the base color. Now you can do it just by grabbing that whole node, which is what I'm going to do, or you could just grab the path. It's up to you, but let's jump into that material. I don't remember what we called it. I think it's right here. And let's paste that in, and we're just going to see what this one looks like in place of that one. This one's a different color, so it's gonna look a lot different when we do that color correct on it. But yeah, I kind of like the splattery one better. Splattery one looks better for this guy. More interesting.
All right, thanks for sticking around for so long. This video was much longer than I anticipated, but I think it was important because I needed to show a lot of these little tips and tricks to get that really interesting kind of look. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you don't know about Greyscalegorilla Plus, please check it out. We have thousands of assets for 3D artists who make your life a lot easier. So until next time, Moose says bye-bye.